Many among those who study and enjoy history have a fascination with war. It is normal to look for humanity where conflict is at its highest. Usually, at the beginning at least, we are in love with the epic side of war. The side where wars are won with courage by the strength of the sword, by the clash of men and the will of gods. But if you strip away the poetry, peel back the blood and bronze, you will find something far more mundane at the heart of every victory. Grain, water, firewood, shoes. When we are done studying the tactical genius of this or that general, we end up where we all end up, on logistics. Now, logistics is a fundamental factor of war in every age, but today we're going to focus on the ancient world, where every campaign meant weeks or months of marching under the open sky with very little technological instruments to help themselves. Now, forgive my pronunciation, but the Greeks had a word for it. Epiteikismos, building a fort or base inside enemy territory. But it wasn't just about defense, it was about planting the roots of supply deep into foreign soil. From the Babylonian to the Persians to the Greeks, every empire, every serious power learned that without a system to carry grain to men and men to battle, the war was already lost. The importance of logistics wasn't theoretical, it decided the destiny of empires. Let's look at some examples. Take the Persian invasion of Greece of 480 BC. While Herodotus claimed millions of men were part of this army, historians estimate around 100,000 troops. Either way, this was a force so large that feeding it was a real problem. The Persians dug canals and stockpiled grain at waypoints months in advance. They requisitioned livestock across Anatolia, according to Herodotus. They even dried meat and stored it in preparation points across Thrace and Macedonia. And yet, despite the monstrous planning, the sheer weight of supplying such a force in hostile terrain slowed them down to a crawl, exposed them to ambush, and after Thermopylae, made the failure at Salamis all the more fatal. With supplies collapsing, the campaign was far less effective than it should have been. Alexander the Great knew the value of mobility, and that it came not from the speed of the men, but from careful provisioning. Alexander's power came from his speed. His greatest talent wasn't just tactic or charisma, it was movement. He moved fast, often using light baggage trains and relying on the local population and the local resources, meaning he needed to know that he was gonna find these things. It was all preparation. In Italy, we find a commander who, while incredibly capable on the battlefield, underestimated the power of logistics. In 218 BC, Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps to strike a blow that Rome would never forget. While he managed to sustain his army on Roman soil for over a decade, his lack of reinforcements and supply was a constant problem, limiting his impact on the battlefield. By overextending and attacking a region that could not be supplied, since the Carthaginian fleet could not fight the Roman fleet in order to provide him with what he needed, he had taken a gamble. His gamble was that Romans would fight him, and he would defeat them. And when Quintus Fabius Maximus, the waiter, arrived, understanding that this was his weakness, Rome simply stopped fighting him. If you wanna stand there in my territory, supplying yourself, losing time, and taking a city or two, do it. I'll just retake them when you go away. And you can do nothing about it because you do not have the resources to supply yourself at the level you would need to be. This brings us to the masters of logistics of the ancient world, the Romans. The Romans turned logistics into a war machine of its own. Their legions didn't just march, they marched in order, building roads as they went, mapping their terrain, establishing way stations, digging wells, and making forage points. Their armies carried portable mills, ovens, and modular fortification gear. Each soldier was his own porter, carrying between 30 and 40 kilos on his back. Not just weapons, but food rations, cooking gear, spades, and engineering equipment. This was called the Mulus Marianus, the Marius Mule, meaning that the entire army contributed to the carrying potential of the force, not just the baggage trains. This meant that the army, while a little overloaded with weight, could move faster because it needed to be supplied less. And many a battle was won before the enemy was ever seen. An advantage in logistics almost always translated in an advantage in positioning. If I have the better logistics, if I can supply myself and you can't, you have to fight me where I want to fight you. When Caesar moved into Gaul, his greatest triumphs were not the battles of Alesia or Gergovia, but his ability to build bridges across the Rhine, dig canals, and supply tens of thousands of men hundreds of miles from Rome in hostile territory. He could lay siege to a hilltop city in the middle of the enemy land and still feed his troops because he controlled the roads. Well, he made the roads. Starvation became a weapon to use against the people that lived there. If you think about it, two of the greatest defeats Rome suffered at the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD and at Carrhae in 53 BC, from different people in different locations, were both caused by ambushes, situations where the Romans found themselves ambushed by their enemies. Ambushing, after all, is a way to force your enemy to fight where you want them to fight, just like logistics. So, when the Romans lost, they lost because they were played at a different game. Logistics and ambushing can both be used to gain the same thing. So going back to Rome and their kinds of logistics, the Romans were masters of many things, and one of them was the building of roads. To the Romans, roads were not just a part of their territory, they were military infrastructure, a militarized artery stretching from the heart of Italy to the furthest frontier of the empire. The first Roman road, the Via Appia, was built in 312 BC by Appius Claudius Caecus, and it was a military road, a direct supply line to Capua during the Second Samnite War. The Samnites, fighting from the hills, thought that terrain would protect them. They were wrong. The Appia let Roman forces march straight through the countryside with wagons full of arms, food, and reinforcements, making the Samnite far closer to Rome than they used to be. Every timetable of the Samnite was thrown into disarray. By the late Republic, there were over 80,000 kilometers of roads, all calibrated, marked by milestones, and maintained by curatores viarum, road commissioners. Every 15 to 20 Roman miles, a mansio, a kind of military motel, would serve as a resupply point, rest stop, and intelligence node. Horses could be swapped, messages could be passed, soldiers could rest, and most importantly, grain could be moved, because it always comes back to grain. The annona militaris, the grain supply for soldiers, was a formal institution by the imperial era, but it had roots in the logistical nightmares of the Republican generals. In the early Republic, soldiers had to provide their own rations. By the times of the Punic Wars, the state had learned to centralize supply, using fleets, contracts with publicani, private contractors, and military granaries, or horrea militaria. These weren't just barns, they were stone fortresses of food, often guarded, elevated against the damp, and strategically placed near rivers or junctions. In some campaigns, Rome built them in advance of the army, so that by the time the legions arrived, the grain was already waiting. When Scipio Africanus invaded North Africa in 204 BC, his success depended on controlling the maritime logistics. He worked with the Senate to secure a fleet large enough not only to transport his men, but to ensure that supply could continue uninterrupted across the Mediterranean. Rome's dominance at sea didn't just defeat Carthage at the Battle the Agates Islands in 241 BC, it allowed Rome to wage war abroad, far from its homeland, and keep its armies fed and equipped on foreign soil. By Caesar's time, after the Marian reforms, logistics was already deeply professionalized. His commentari are filled with constant logistical problems. One famous moment in his British campaign stands out. After landing in Britain in 55 BC, a storm wrecked his fleet and ruined his supply lines. He quickly built a fortified beachhead, securing grain from the local tribes, and had his men rebuild ships on the shore, under threat of enemy attack. It was a logistical disaster turned into a display of Roman discipline. No retreat, no starving, just adaptation. Brick by brick, ship by ship, Caesar rebuilt his logistical network as his first priority. In the imperial age, the system scaled up. Each legion had its own quartermaster office, the Praefectus Castrorum, usually a seasoned veteran. He was in charge not just of the camp layout, but of overseeing supply chains. Every fort had granaries, armories, storage yards, and sometimes even bakeries, where they would bake panis militaris, a tough kind of bread with an incredibly long shelf life. At sea, the Romans liked to have their ships do double duties. Around the 1st century AD, the Classis Alexandrina was tasked with ferrying Egyptian grain up to Rome, but in times of war, the same vessels were repurposed for campaigns. When Trajan launched his campaign into Dacia, rivers became his lifelines. He had barges custom-built to navigate the Danube, and built massive river ports and navalia shipyards on its banks. Trajan engineers even built the famous Trajan Bridge over the Danube in 105 AD, designed by Apollodorus of Damascus. While valuable as a supply line, this bridge was a symbolic gesture. It meant that Trajan could project power outward, an offensive expression of logistics. Hadrian, his successor, emphasized defensive logistics. His wall in Britannia wasn't just a military barrier, it was a logistical corridor. Behind the wall, a road called Military Way allowed legions to move quickly. Every fort along the wall had its own mini-economy, sustained by shipments from the south and local taxation. An incredible example of Roman logistical mastery was the campaign by Septimius Severus into Caledonia, modern-day Scotland, in the 3rd century. Rather than fighting a full-scale war in a difficult area, Severus moved methodically. He built roads through bogs, cut forests, drained swamps. He built what he needed and cleared the terrain so much that his legion could move and forage easily. The enemy had nowhere to run, no ambush point, no logistical advantage. He didn't win with a battle, he won with an infrastructure siege. Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman soldier and historian, writes of how the Persians feared the Romans' engineers more than the swords. For wherever they go, they bring roads, bridges, and camps. Then come the soldiers. Now, we have described many situations where logistics were fundamental to Roman military operations. But let's go into details about their use. As we already hinted at, logistics can be used offensively to project power or defensively to preserve it. Rome mastered both ways. Let's begin with offensive logistics, meaning creating permanent supply corridors into enemy territory. When a campaign began, the first question wasn't where do we fight or when, but how do we keep the army fed and mobile there. Take Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars again. The reason why we often come back to it is how well it is sourced from the man himself. We cannot trust the De Bello Gallico too much about details of what happened because it is a marketing text, marketing the ability of Julius Caesar, but we can trust it on things we don't believe he would lie about. Logistics is one of them. Each winter, Caesar ordered these legions into separate winter quarters. spread across the territory to reduce the strain on any one area. He collected grain from subdued tribes and used them as forward supply bases. Even the decision to cross the Rhine, a symbolic move, was supported by a logistical masterstroke. Caesar built a bridge in just 10 days, purely to prove Rome's logistical superiority. He didn't stay long, he didn't need to. The message was clear. Rome can go anywhere, even across what you thought was a barrier. Rome can project power, and so you should stay there and not taunt us. Now, defensive logistics are more about stability, and the Romans weren't always masters of this. The limes in Germania, the fortified frontier, was a surface defense, but when the enemy entered Roman territories during the late Empire, it was a problem. Cities were sacked, destroyed, the invader tribes had an easy time to forage into Roman territory. That is when Aurelian came in the late 3rd century. Aurelian understood the power of defending deep instead of on the surface. Instead of having his troops on the limes, trying to keep the enemy out of his territory, he fortified every single important center, making it so that when the enemy crossed the limes into Roman territory, they could not siege cities easily, and the army that was no longer deployed on the border could react and adapt, finding the invaders in the right spot to destroy them. The logistical network adapted to support this kind of deep defense, building roads and passages to allow the army to move inside of their own territories quickly and effectively. Now, going back to the late Republic, there is a general so specialized in logistics that he managed to destroy even Julius Caesar with it. I mean, almost destroyed. In the end, he lost, but because he chose to fight. I'm talking about Pompey the Great, Pompey Magnus. Now, we can see his logistical skill most clearly during his campaign against the pirates in 67 BC. At the time, the Mediterranean had almost become ungovernable. Pirate fleets, emboldened by Rome's destruction and slow response time, ravaged merchant shipping, blockading grain routes, and even dared to raid the coast of Italy itself. Rome's capital, so dependent on grain from Sicily, Africa, and Egypt, teetered on the edge of famine. Now, if you want to know the military and political details about this, you should be seeing a link to my Pompey video right now. But moving on. While other Romans would have thought to hunt the pirates down, finding a climactic battle, as it was the Roman way, Pompey understood that his enemy had logistics troubles of their own, and to ensure their ability to strike all around the Mediterranean Sea, they had bases, pirate bases, everywhere. And so, instead of hunting the seas, Pompey began hunting the land. He simply had to go, step by step, over the entire coast and destroy anywhere the pirates could find solace. It took only 3 months to completely cut the pirate supply out and force them into battle. With 13 naval districts divided with 13 different commanders, Pompey had a network to wage war against them. He had turned an asymmetrical war of many pirate commanders with many fleets against one Roman fleet into a symmetrical one. But the job was not yet done. After capturing the pirates, Pompey didn't execute everyone. He understood that piracy was a symptom of dislocation and poverty, particularly after the Mithridatic Wars had devastated Asia Minor and Syria. So, what did he do? He resettled the pirates, gave them land, especially in Cilicia, away from the sea, where they could farm, trade, and live under Roman administration. This was not mercy. It was peacetime logistics. Pompey was creating a stable food-producing, tax-paying, manpower-generating province. He turned parasites into producers and placed them exactly where he wanted them for his next adventure to the east. Now, during the Eastern conquest, Pompey kept working at his logistical network all the time. As he conquered the various kingdoms, he reorganized them to exploit their local resources and add to his own ability to project power. His conquest was a self-feeding machine, continuously sustaining itself. And so, moving to the end of our little walk through the logistical history of Rome, we see that an empire cannot survive on strength alone. It survives because it knows how to feed, move, and inform that strength. Rome mastered this, not just through brilliant generals or disciplined troops, but through the cold, bureaucratic machinery of logistics, the boring part of war, the unseen world of depots, roads, records, and rations. It survived through institutions such as the Cursus Publicus, Rome's state-run courier and supply system, founded under Augustus and capable of transporting messages all over the empire. Rome had a mailing system that kept everyone informed. Those stations we talked about on the road, they served this. They nourished this system, creating their own version of high-speed internet. Through Suetonius, we can know that Tiberius could receive reports from Germany in days. And this system was so important to the empire that the upkeep kept going through the ages. Hadrian personally reformed the Cursus Publicus, limiting abuse and improving timeliness, especially on the eastern roads. So when you think about the Roman conquests and you want to talk about the gladius or the scutum or the pilum or the army organization, the tactics, the formations, remember that none of these would have been possible without the logistics, and probably everything would have been possible with the logistics and with a lower level of tactical prowess. Ancient Rome was not the heroic kind of empire. It didn't need to win through sheer determination. Rome was a machine. Rome was unstoppable. If you defeated a Roman army, another would come, and then another, and then another. If you had a Roman army in front of you, the day after you would have a fortress, and the day after artillery would be placed on top of that fortress. Rome was relentless. And while we spend a lot of time talking about the reasons why Rome fell, one can easily look at the logistical network and the difficulties in maintaining it to find many of the necessary answers. I hope you enjoyed all this talk of granaries and ships, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.